So it seems to me that one of the things that we're looking for are intellectually honest belief systems. And that's sort of what we're after here, I think. And you had a really interesting thought experiment that you did. I don't know if it was with your class, where you were sort of asking people to imagine their ideal belief system. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of context for this. One strategy that cognitive scientists sometimes use when they want to understand some cognitive capacity is they think about what the ideal version of it would be, so that we have some reference point for figuring out how well humans are doing. And so one place where people do this a lot is in the context of perception. And so people will develop what they call ideal observer analyses. And so we can look at situations and see what's the best you could do with the perceptual information in front of you in terms of reconstructing what's actually out there. And if we know what the best you could do is, what the ideal is, now we have a reference point for asking, well, how well are humans doing? I mean, sure, sometimes we're susceptible to visual illusions or get things wrong, but maybe we're doing the best we can given the evidence that's actually available to us. And so with that sort of approach in mind, I started asking myself, what would an ideal believer look like? Right? What would it look like to be the best kind of believer you could be? What does that even mean? And really posing this is an invitation to think about ways in which that might bring in assumptions that we're already bringing to the table about what it is to believe. But let's for a moment start with a sort of narrow notion of what it would mean to be an ideal believer. Suppose that an ideal believer is somebody who just has the most accurate beliefs. That's the only dimension we care about. Well, if that's true, we could try to figure out what ought human belief to be like in order to be the most accurate. So here's a couple things you might expect. If our only goal with our beliefs is to be as accurate as possible, then you ought to expect beliefs to change every time you get new evidence. They might only change a little bit, right? Because you have a whole lifetime of evidence that's pushed you towards one direction, and then you get a little bit of evidence that pushes you in another direction. But it means our beliefs should constantly be changing as we get new evidence. And in fact, that's the ideal of how science works. But that doesn't seem to be how a lot of human beliefs work. I mean, if any of you have had an argument with a colleague about a political issue or a moral issue, right? Normally presenting what you take to be very good evidence doesn't necessarily result in a change in their beliefs. So that's really interesting, because that suggests we're seeing a systematic difference between the way human belief actually works and what we might expect on this sort of thought experiment of thinking about ideal believers who are just tracking the truth. And so that's why I think that's useful. It gives us traction in thinking about what sorts of properties we'd expect beliefs to have under certain assumptions, and maybe are those assumptions wrong? Do we need to think about it differently?